when I study history, it's much easier to look at what happened in the past because you can clean it up better. You have documents, you have declassified materials. It's easier to get to the truth in some sense because there's just more available, materials are available, and we are dispassionate about it. If I look at the Second World War, for as horrible as it was, I can relatively dispassionately research it. If I look at things right now, everything is so hot and everything is so boiling and everybody is so angry that it is difficult to have what you just said, a good analysis. And part of that, I believe, is that we are intrinsically caught in this dilemma that we have to believe we are right. Right? We couldn't have a political discussion if we didn't have some sense of, I know how it's working. And that's why I do believe for political discourse, maybe the most important question we have to ask ourselves is, what if I'm wrong? Because only then I might have enough mental space to actually also listen to the other person and really think through the arguments that I'm thrown at. Only if I can, let's not call it doubt, but a healthy amount of skepticism. Because what I see a lot is there's a lot of talking happen, and I think it has never been easier to distribute our thoughts, and it has never been more difficult to be heard and therefore engage in a discussion. So on my own channel, I haven't done that enough, in the sense that I haven't invited enough people whom I thoroughly disagree with. But there's so many aspects that I disagree with that are very popular in the general media that I don't think that they need even more distribution. But it's one of the things that I'm actively thinking about, how to do that, how to engage, the counterpoints in order to kind of, get closer to an understanding. Because at the end of the day, most people want the same thing. Most people want to have a decent life and good conditions for their families and so on and so forth. And that's that's true for the people on the very bottom. That's true for people on the very top. And almost everybody, except for psychopaths, have the capacity for empathy. So my question is how to understand each other better. And I don't have an answer yet.
Well, I think we have to separate two things here. People have empathy, they have love, they have fundamental human nature of cooperation, and as much as we have, terrible human nature. But that's not what exploitative institutions run on. And I think it's very, very critical for all of us to understand this, that there are at least two levels of engagement. One is the level of engagement with human beings, where we can assume, and we should in fact assume, like I talk to a lot of people from the right, and they are all my good friends, because at the end of the day, they are human beings. And you can, as you said, you can agree a lot on a lot of common points, as much as you cannot agree on a lot of uncommon points. But that's not what institutions are. And that, I think, is where the left has a lot more to contribute to than, a lot of, be that the neoclassical economic studies or, this absolutely irrelevant theories coming out of centrist political science, which talks about democracy as if there are no power institutions, which talks about economics almost on aggregate terms, overlooking like power structures in which institutions are embedded. So yes, I mean, we must think about, let's think about something like the war over Ukraine. Like, if you go at the level of the people, Ukrainians don't want it. Russians are fleeing to escape it, but the war goes on because there are real contradictions that are embedded in institutions who are dedicated to private profit accumulation, preserving their power. And that can never be overcome through this simplistic understanding about true human nature. It has to be embedded in analytical understanding about how institutions work, not human nature. Even if you place me as the head, at the head of NATO or Pentagon, I would behave exactly the same way. So it's not about human nature. That's one. I also wanted to briefly comment on your point about what you said about this, your ability to relate to facts of the Second World War as opposed to where we are today. And I think that has been very, very critical to our sort of political consciousness, because the ability to learn it begins in many ways by discovery of lies. So the first time I began to think about democracy seriously was when I discovered how hollow these liberal democracies are. Because from our childhood, we were told that India is a liberal democracy, and by the standard of liberal democracy, India is one of those rare exceptions in the global South, which has never had military dictatorships, or ever since its national independence. So, and countries after countries in Latin America, in Africa, in East Asia, they fell to dictatorships. So the propaganda was very effective that we are democracy. But once you start looking closely into this democracy, you realize that this is this absolute undemocracy of this democracy, where all you can do as a citizens within the democratic structure conceded by the state is to appear once in 5 years in elections, and to cast your vote between two mafia parties, and then to show your finger mark that you have voted in Instagram and WhatsApp statuses. I mean, that's all you are supposed to do as citizens. The moment you ask for a share in resources and power, you are doomed. All questions about resources are taken behind corporate boardrooms and bureaucracy and corporate board meetings. It is a total exclusion of citizenship from decision over resource and power. And it is this sort of how hollow this concept of liberal democracy, this ritualistic democracy, and so on. I mean, it's better than feudalism, sure, but it's not substantive in any way. So once you start discovering the lies we are surrounded by, that is the beginning of real search for truth and knowledge, because that's when you go inside it, and then you search for, okay, you look for inconsistencies, you think about what, you go back to Aristotle and read what he wrote about democracy. He said that when he was writing about democracy, he assumed that significant wealth inequality cannot be there if we are to think seriously about democracy. Because what is said that, suppose you democratize a society and there is tremendous concentration of wealth, what would be the first step by those who are below? They would move in a direction to redistribute resources. It is from there you think that capitalism, which is based on more and more concentration of wealth, and not wealth on ordinary private actors but big corporations, and democracy, which is giving fundamental power to people, are at odds and there is a conflict. So that, I think, I just wanted to respond to that, to your point, and about this importance of being dispassionate. And if you go back and look at the great philosophers on justice, Adam Smith's impartial spectatorship, Immanuel Kant, John Rawls' theory of veil of ignorance, you would always find this, that insofar as questions of justice, you would always have to detach yourself. There was one of my friends who asked me that, oh, what does it mean to be a leftist? Is there any fundamental distinction between the left and the right? And I told him something that, which was very sort of an instantaneous response, a spontaneous response, but on hindsight, I felt that it was very profound. Like I said that if I am a right-wing Indian, outside Kashmir, my position on Kashmir would be that India has a right to occupy Kashmir. But if I am born in Kashmir, then I would have had exactly the opposite position. It is this sort of inconsistency within the writing, because if you are writing, you have to be committed towards this dark elixir of nationalism which justifies occupation. You cannot be a nationalist and still say that Kashmiri has a right to freedom. You cannot be a British nationalism in 1930s and say that India has a right to secede from our empire. You cannot be an American nationalist and say that we have no business to intervene in the Middle East. And you cannot be a Japanese nationalist and to go out there and not support the rape of Nanjing. So I think these are the fundamental, some of the fundamental pieces around which we should think of in terms of justice and our collective democratic political project.